Leaks introduces this AI rendered voice generated from an essay written by Professor Robert Gordon, former personal secretary to, and the first Western person designated as a Brahmachari, and deerskin carrier, by Maharishi. These skin boys, as they were called in the TM movement, were close confidants of Maharishi, who saw the inner workings of Maharishi's inner circle. Robert has a PhD from Princeton University. He has held posts at the Universities of California, New Mexico, and Oregon, with a specialty in American religious history. Part 10, Revealing the Unspoken, Gunilla's encounter with Maharishi and the Beatles' departure from India. He asked her again what happened that morning, and she suddenly became defensive, insisting that she had already told him what had happened. And with a strange rasp in her voice he had never heard before, Gunilla said, "Why is this so important all of a sudden, Rickard? What's the matter with you anyway?" With that, she pushed him away, rushed to the bathroom and slammed the door. Considerable time passed and Gunilla finally came out of the bathroom, looking very grave. He could tell she had been crying. Then she sat directly in front of Rickard, and looking him in the eye, said, "Promise me that you will never repeat this to anyone, ever, as long as you live." When he agreed, Gunilla confessed that her early morning visits with Maharishi had occurred frequently, that she had gone there many times to ask him questions. At first, they were philosophical, but they grew ever more personal as time went on. He became for her a kind of substitute father for the one she had lost in childhood. She found all these early morning meetings beautifully uplifting. But one morning, indeed the very morning Rickard was calling into question, something very different happened. It began with their normal morning banter, but suddenly there was a long silence. Then Maharishi instructed her to get up and shut the door, something he had never requested before. Then he said, "Will you do something for me?" When she affirmatively replied, he asked her to take off her shirt. When she did, he instructed her to come closer. And then closer. When she was within reach, he stretched out his arms and took her breasts in his hands. And then he shook them, she confessed. Just shook them back and forth. "No one has ever done this to me and it felt so strange and so silly that I almost burst out laughing." Then the celibate master took the shawl from his shoulders, and lay down on his back in his bed, with what appeared to her to be an erection, though she didn't really want to look too closely, and his thin silk robe concealed his actual flesh. By then she'd had enough, put her shirt back on, said goodbye, and left. Well, the great celibate master was not done with Gunilla. Now that he'd had a taste of that delectable pie, he wanted a big piece. He soon set out to get it. An air of tense excitement pervaded the air as the last stage of initiator training arrived, the puja test and the revelation of the secret of the mantras. The anxious course participants were gathered in the large villa of a wealthy devotee. They were called one by one to Maharishi's room to face the final hurdle. Gunilla was summoned earlier than Rickard. When she passed her test, she sought him out in the waiting room, and he asked her the question gnawing at him as he waited. Had Maharishi made another sexual advance? He wouldn't dare, she replied, but there was more to the story. It would have to wait until he had finished his test. Some 3 hours later Rickard also passed and returned quickly to their houseboat to compare notes. When he returned, he could see that she had been crying. When he asked her what was wrong, she confided to him what happened after her puja test. Maharishi inquired as to her plans after the course. She told him she intended to return to Sweden after traveling around India for 2 weeks. Then she revealed Maharish's next seduction move. He said, "Why don't I stay with him instead? Go back with him to Rishikesh?" She continued, "He wants me to stay on after the course is over. After the others leave." She said it was more a command than a question, and, tears streaming down her face, she looked plaintively at Rickard and sobbed, "What shall I do?" The moment of truth was at hand for poor Gunilla. Would she obey the command of the master, or heed her own inner wisdom about what his invitation really meant? Suddenly her eyes flashed with anger and she burst out, "Oh Rickard, it was so awful. I could see he was embarrassed. I could tell what he was really asking me. People have asked me that before. But he didn't have the nerve. He didn't dare say it right out because he's such a coward. And then Gunilla found her inner wisdom and said the line that closes our story of why the Beatles left India. In a near-shouting voice she cried, "Rickard, I don't want to sleep with a fat, 50-year-old man, even if he is the greatest guru in the world." Part 11, Unveiling the Shadows, the Beatles' departure from India and Maharishi's fall from grace. And then Gunilla found her inner wisdom and said the line that closes our story of why the Beatles left India. In a near-shouting voice she cried, "Rickard, I don't want to sleep with a fat, 50-year-old man, even if he is the greatest guru in the world." Were John and George right about Maharishi? Were they justified in bolting the ashram? Was it true he was not a realized master, just sexy Sadie, a sexual predator? Our fuller story of his behavior during the Beatles' initiator training course answers the question. Consider, Maharishi made 2 unsuccessful seduction attempts, Mia and Rosalind, twice. Then there is Gunilla, first fondled and then propositioned. And finally, there is a 4th girl, well known to me, who had an experience like Gunilla's "Come Closer" story, but who declines to be identified or quoted. Well, that's 4 women who all had a brush with sexy Sadie. I'd say the Beatles got out just in time. They were right to leave Rishikesh, and for the reason they did. But their departure does not erase the fact that they took with them the spiritual wisdom and music of India and shared this precious discovery with their fans through their songs. What about Maharishi? While he put on a good face during the puja tests and the imparting of the secret mantras, according to those close to him at the time, he was badly shaken, saddened, and defeated. As course participant Mike Dolan relates, "What has never been reported is the dramatic effect that the Beatles leaving India had on Maharishi. His brilliant, beautiful yogic radiance was reduced to grey and ashen. He became physically sick when the course moved to Kashmir on Dal Lake. Maharishi now looked visibly frail and without that effervescence. Maharishi had good reason to be a little low on effervescence. After all, his whole success was based on his image as the saintly master, untouched by the gnawings of the flesh. And now the Beatles had left the ashram, Lennon was denouncing him in the press as a hypocritical phony for hitting on the chicks, Paul told the press they left Maharishi because they found out he's human, and the story was rocking the faith of his true believers too. Not only was it the subject of breakfast gossip amongst the initiator trainees in Kashmir, but it was also reverberating with the faithful around the world. For example, back in London, Joyce Collins-Smith, Maharishi's longtime personal assistant for British affairs, pondered the shocking news in the light of her own experience. In her book Call No Man Master, she recounts the effect of the news on herself and other British staffers in the TM movement there. The news recalled the days when Maharishi first began locking his door in the afternoons, closeted alone with one young woman or another. "We thought him to be giving special tuition to chosen devotees, we now realized something different. We saw something he had intended to conceal." Part 12, Betrayal and Deception, the Dark Secrets of Maharishi's Charismatic Power. In her book Call No Man Master, she recounts the effect of the news on herself and other British staffers in the TM movement there. The news recalled the days when Maharishi first began locking his door in the afternoons, closeted alone with one young woman or another. "We thought him to be giving special tuition to chosen devotees, we now realized something different. We saw something he had intended to conceal." Even higher-ups in the TM movement were shaken. Charlie Lutz, the president of Maharishi's spiritual regeneration movement and one of his most devoted longtime acolytes, rugged clean-cut Charlie Lutz, he could have been cast as Superman, had his doubts. He asked Maharishi straight up if the stories were true. Maharishi trumped the answer and brazenly lied through his teeth, "But Charlie, I am a lifetime celibate, I don't know anything about sexual desires." Maharishi lied because he was only too aware that his movement would crash if what the Beatles were saying gained general currency, and he became viewed as a sexual predator and hypocritical fraud. So, he strong-faced the news, denied its truth, the story died down, and he dodged the bullet. Well, you'd think that Maharishi would have learned his lesson. Unfortunately for several young ladies to come, he could not escape his sexual cravings. Although the record goes a little dark from the time the Beatles left India, perhaps Maharishi cooled things for a while as he licked his wounds from the Beatles' fiasco. Just 9 months after their departure, his next victim arrived in Rishikesh. She was Britisher Linda Williams, later Pierce, after she married, great-granddaughter of the Duke of Grafton, pretty, and with money too, a threefer for sexy Sadie, nobility, attractive, and dough. Maharishi homed right in, and she afterwards gave a detailed account of the whole sordid affair to a British newspaper, including the painful moment when she woke up and realized that Maharishi was not a perfect master, just another dirty old man lusting after the young flesh of the women who surrounded him. The article was colorfully subtitled, "I gave my mind to the Maharishi and he took my body." Linda began TM in 1967, about the same time as the Beatles, and was present with them at some of Maharishi's lectures in London. She got such good results from meditation that she applied for the initiator training course to begin in January 1969, again in the ashram at Rishikesh. It wasn't long after she arrived that Maharishi laid on his seduction MO, and the besotted Linda succumbed. She began having sex with him regularly at the ashram during her initiator training course. She told the reporter, "I was a virgin and knew nothing about sex. That he said that he loved me and that I was the only one. We made love regularly. And I don't think I was the only girl. At one stage, I thought I was pregnant by him." When she finished the course and returned to London, she told some of her close friends of her affair with the master. They tried to warn her. "Others told me I wasn't his first girl. There was a lot of talk that he tried to rape me, a pharaoh," she related. Undeterred, she returned to the ashram during the Christmas season 1969, and, she says, the relationship just started up again. But this time Linda was put off by the tawdriness of it all and told Maharishi that what they were doing was wrong and immoral. His response, the Maharishi just laughed that off. Crushed and confused, Linda broke off the affair and returned to London, suffering devastating psychological consequences for years after. She just couldn't stand being kissed or touched, and felt ashamed that she'd been manipulated by Maharishi, and just couldn't see that he was a dirty old man.